have come here to die. I die a queen. But I would rather die the wife of Culpeper.
England was used to bloodshed. Beheadings, hangings, burnings. The crowds had seen it all.
Oh Lord God, have mercy on us.
Apportez l'épée.
But when the Queen's former lover was dragged out for execution, what happened next left even hardened Londoners shaken. Why was his punishment so extreme? And how did a private affair with Catherine Howard turn into one of the most disturbing deaths of Henry VIII's reign? The Howard Game. To understand why Derham died so horribly, we need to go back to where it all began. With a teenage girl named Catherine Howard and the ruthless family that shaped her destiny. Because this wasn't just about adultery. Catherine was born around 1521 into the Howard family. History would come to call them political survivors who had clawed back from near extinction after picking the wrong side at the Battle of Bosworth. Her uncle Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, was obsessed with one goal and one goal only, getting another Howard woman onto the throne of England. He'd already managed it once with Anne Boleyn, but that ended with her head rolling in 1536. Now he needed a replacement, and Catherine fit the bill perfectly. The Howards had a proven strategy: marry into royalty, gain power, then use that power to protect the family. It was a deadly game where failure meant execution, but success meant controlling the most powerful man in Europe. Catherine's childhood was a mess. Her father, Edmund Howard, was basically a deadbeat aristocrat, all noble blood, zero money. The guy was so broke, he was hiding from debt collectors. In 1527, he wrote to Cardinal Wolsey begging for help, saying he dared not show his face in public for fear of being thrown in prison for debt. Edmund had tried everything, begging his brother, the Duke, for loans, taking dangerous positions on the Scottish border, even attempting to get involved in overseas trade. Nothing worked. With 10 kids to feed and no steady income, Edmund made the decision that sealed Catherine's fate. He shipped her off to live with his stepmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This wasn't unusual for noble families. Children were routinely sent away to learn proper behavior and make useful connections. But for Catherine, it meant entering a world where political ambition trumped everything else, including personal happiness. The Dowager's household was like a finishing school for future Howard assets. Catherine learned basic skills like reading and writing, but the real education was in family ambition. The Howards believed any sacrifice was worth making if it advanced their position. Thomas Cromwell, their political enemy, had just engineered Henry's disastrous marriage to Anne of Cleves. The king was disgusted with his German bride, and the Howards saw their opening. They started maneuvering Catherine into position, making sure she'd catch Henry's eye when he was most vulnerable. The trap was set. Catherine Howard was about to become the bait that would destroy everything she touched. Secret affairs that changed everything. While the Howards plotted Catherine's rise to power, she was busy creating the scandals that would eventually become a nightmare for her. During her teenage years at the Dowager's estates, Catherine had 2 secret relationships that broke every rule of noble behavior. The Dowager Duchess ran her household like a small village. Horsham in Sussex, and later Lambeth near London, housed dozens of young people from connected families, all living in communal dormitories with minimal supervision. Boys and girls slept in separate quarters, but determined teenagers found ways around these restrictions. They could steal keys, pick locks, or simply wait for the adults to fall asleep before sneaking around. The first affair started when Catherine was around 14. Henry Mannix was the son of a neighboring family, hired to teach the Howard kids music. He was handsome, charming, and completely wrong for a duke's great niece. Catherine knew exactly what she was doing. When Mannix pushed for intimacy, she laid down the law. She would never be naughty with him because he couldn't marry her. The social difference between them was enormous. She was a Howard, and he was a minor gentry at best. But teenage hormones don't care about social rules. Their relationship became physical anyway. They met secretly in the Duchess's chapel during dark evenings, where Mannix later admitted he felt more than was convenient. These meetings continued for months until the Dowager caught them red-handed kissing in a corridor. Though Catherine claimed nothing serious happened, Mannix later boasted to other servants that he'd been intimate with her and that she'd promised him her maidenhead. The scandal might have ended there, but jealousy made Mannix do something stupid. When he saw Catherine getting involved with someone else, he wrote an anonymous letter warning the Duchess to check on her granddaughter's activities. The letter suggested she visit Catherine's room half an hour after bedtime to see what displeased her. Catherine found the letter and showed it to her new lover, who threatened Mannix into silence. The second affair was far more dangerous. Francis Derham was 26, a gentleman pensioner in the Duke's service, well-born and wealthy enough to be considered legitimate marriage material. When he started pursuing Catherine around 1537, she fell completely. Their relationship became the worst-kept secret in the household. The dormitory system made privacy impossible, so everyone knew when Derham started sneaking into the girls' quarters for midnight feasts. Wine, strawberries, and apples were smuggled upstairs, turning Catherine's bedroom into a party venue. Other residents complained about being kept awake by the noise and what they diplomatically called puffing and blowing coming from Catherine's bed. Catherine and Derham considered themselves married in everything but name. They called each other husband and wife, exchanged gifts, and regularly shared a bed. Catherine later confessed that Derham had lain with me and used me in such a way as a man does his wife many times. But the thing is, by the standards of the time, this actually constituted a legal marriage. The church recognized that couples who agreed to marry and then had sex were bound together, ceremony or not. This would come back to haunt Catherine in the worst possible way. The affair lasted about 3 months in 1538. Derham showered Catherine with expensive gifts, silk shirts, velvet fabric for dresses, jewelry, and an embroidered love token. She gave him an armband to wear on his sleeve, publicly marking him as her man. Their behavior became so obvious that servants started gossiping about when they'd announce their engagement. But everything changed when Catherine got her big break, an appointment as maid of honor to Anne of Cleves. The Howard political machine was finally ready to deploy their secret weapon. Catherine's romantic entanglements had to be sacrificed for the greater family goal. When Derham protested, saying he was sure he could marry her if the king were dead, he unknowingly signed his own death warrant. Words like that would later be twisted into evidence of treasonous intent. Catherine faced an impossible choice. She could reveal her relationship with Derham, which might ruin any chance of marrying the king, or she could hide it and hope the past stayed buried. Her Howard pride made the decision for her. She would never admit to being anything less than worthy of a crown. The king falls hard. Henry VIII in 1540 was a broken man desperately trying to reclaim his youth. At 48, the once magnificent athlete had become a diseased, bloated shadow of his former self. His ulcerated leg tortured him constantly, turning the man who once dominated tournaments into someone who needed help walking. His marriage to Anne of Cleves had left him feeling humiliated and deceived. The German princess spoke no English, had no interest in music or dancing, and showed zero romantic interest in her husband. Henry's physical decline was shocking. He'd gone from a lean, athletic 6-footer to a man weighing close to 300 pounds. His waist had expanded from 28 inches to over 50. The ulcer on his leg had become so infected that sometimes it would suddenly close, causing him to turn black in the face and nearly suffocate from the toxins backing up in his system. He was a walking medical disaster, but his ego wouldn't let him admit it. That's when Catherine Howard entered the scene. Small, vivacious, with auburn hair and sparkling eyes, she was everything Henry had lost. While Anne of Cleves was stolid and German, Catherine was bubbly and English. She laughed at his jokes, seemed impressed by his stories, and made him feel like the magnificent king he used to be. The effect on Henry was immediate and catastrophic. The French ambassador reported that the king cast a fantasy to Catherine Howard the first time he ever saw her. By April 1540, Henry was showering her with gifts and favors, making zero attempt to hide his obsession. He gave her a square brooch containing 27 diamonds and 26 clusters of pearls. Then came a muffler of black velvet lined with sable fur, decorated with 38 rubies and 572 pearls. Courtiers who'd spent years learning to read Henry's moods were baffled by this sudden transformation. Thomas Cromwell saw these developments and knew he was finished. He'd engineered the Cleves' marriage as part of his foreign policy, and its failure was becoming his political death sentence. The Howard faction moved like sharks smelling blood. They opened their homes to the king, giving him endless opportunities to court Catherine in private. Stephen Gardiner threw lavish parties at Winchester House, while the Dowager Duchess offered her place at Lambeth for intimate meetings. They praised Catherine's pure and honest condition while carefully hiding her scandalous past. The French ambassador said he'd never seen the king in such good spirits or better health. Henry was convinced he'd found his rose without a thorn, the perfect woman who would give him the happiness he deserved. The speed of everything was shocking. By July, Henry had divorced Anne of Cleves on the grounds that their marriage was never consummated. The process that took 6 years and a religious revolution against Catherine of Aragon was finished in just 6 days. The English Church's highest court ruled that Henry had been forced into the German marriage against his will and that it was invalid from the start. On July 28, 1540, Henry married Catherine Howard in a private ceremony. The same day, Thomas Cromwell lost his head on Tower Hill. Catherine had achieved the impossible. She was Queen of England at barely 19 years old. But fairy tales don't exist in Henry's England. Catherine was about to learn that being married to a king was more like being chained to a monster. The Queen's Dangerous Games. Marriage to Henry VIII was no Disney movie. Despite his initial obsession, Catherine quickly discovered the harsh reality of being wed to a diseased, aging tyrant. Henry's ulcerated leg caused constant agony, making him unpredictable and violent. His mood swung wildly between manic energy and black depression. Catherine often caught the worst of it, screaming rages over trivial matters, then desperate attempts to win her forgiveness with expensive gifts. The young queen's response to these pressures was to make the worst possible decisions. First, she started surrounding herself with people from her past, bringing reminders of her scandalous youth right into the heart of the royal court. Catherine Tilney, who'd shared her dormitory at Lambeth, became one of her chamberers. Joan Bulmer, who'd participated in those midnight parties, was appointed to her household staff. Then she made the truly catastrophic decision. She appointed Francis Derham as her private secretary, yes, the same Derham who'd been her lover and considered himself her husband. The man now had direct access to the Queen of England's private chambers and correspondence. This move would later be seen as proof of treasonous intent and evidence that Catherine planned to resume their relationship. Derham's appointment was political poison. He immediately started acting like he had special privileges, boasting about his past with Catherine and treating other courtiers with contempt. When someone questioned his authority, he snapped back that he'd been of the Queen's council before they knew her and would be there after she'd forgotten them. But Catherine's worst decision was yet to come. She began a secret affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber. At around 28, he'd served in the King's intimate circle for years, helping dress the monarch and maintain his chambers. He was wealthy, well-connected, and absolutely the wrong person for the Queen to get involved with. But beneath his charming exterior was something dark. Court records suggest he'd previously raped a park keeper's wife while his servants held her down, then murdered a villager who tried to stop him. Only royal favor had saved him from execution. The affair began in early 1541, with help from Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford. This was the widow of Anne Boleyn's executed brother George, and she seemed to get a sick thrill from arranging the secret meetings. She'd scout out back doors and hidden passages, making sure the lovers could meet undetected. Lady Rochford had her own reasons for taking such risks. She'd been traumatized by her husband's execution and seemed to be living vicariously through Catherine's dangerous romance. Catherine's infatuation with Culpeper was total. She called him her little sweet fool and wrote him passionate letters. In one that survived, she said, "I never longed so much for a thing as I do to see you and to speak with you. It makes my heart to die to think what fortune I have, that I cannot be always in your company." She signed it with yours, "as long as life endures." Those words would kill her. The meetings continued even during Henry's grand tour of the northern counties in summer 1541. While the king was showing off his power to potentially rebellious subjects, his queen was having secret encounters with his most trusted servant. At every stop, Greenwich, Lincoln, Hatfield, Pontefract, York, Lady Rochford arranged private meetings between Catherine and Culpeper. The lovers got increasingly careless. Once, Culpeper had to pick the lock to Catherine's room. Another time, they were almost caught by guards making their rounds. Catherine's servants started getting suspicious when she never seemed to sleep and wouldn't let anyone except Lady Rochford and Catherine Tilney into her private chambers. The Queen would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, then be exhausted and irritable the next day. Meanwhile, Henry remained completely clueless about being cuckolded. He was so happy with his young wife that he couldn't imagine her betraying him. The man who'd executed 2 previous wives for adultery was blind to the obvious signs that his current queen was cheating on him. On November 1st, 1541, he publicly thanked God for the good life he led and trusted to lead with Catherine, ordering bishops to make similar prayers. Within 24 hours, his world would explode. The trap springs shut. Catherine's destruction came from an unexpected direction. John Lascelles was a committed Protestant who saw the Howard rise to power as a disaster for religious reform. When his sister Mary Hall, who'd once worked in the Dowager Duchess's household, told him stories about Catherine's wild youth, he realized he had a weapon that could destroy the entire conservative faction. Lascelles went to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer with devastating information. Mary Hall had witnessed Catherine's relationships with both Henry Manox and Francis Derham during her time at Lambeth. She described nights of partying in the dormitory, secret feasts, and casual sex panics among the Howard household. Cranmer was terrified to act on such explosive information, but he talked to his colleagues Thomas Audley and Edward Seymour. They saw the political opportunity immediately. They could use Catherine's past to destroy not just the Queen, but the entire Howard faction, threatening their positions. The problem was telling the king. Henry's love for Catherine was so obvious that nobody dared speak against her directly. Cranmer decided to write a letter detailing the accusations rather than risk Henry's immediate rage. On November 2nd, 1541, he handed the document to Henry after Mass at Hampton Court. Henry's first reaction was total disbelief. He dismissed the letter as malicious lies and ordered an investigation to find out who was spreading such garbage about his beloved wife. For several days, he kept to his normal routine, convinced his jewel of womanhood was being unfairly attacked. That faith shattered when investigators got confessions from Henry Manox and Francis Derham. Manox admitted to feeling the secrets and other parts of the Queen's body. Derham confessed he'd known her carnally many times, both in his doublet and hose between the sheets and in naked bed. On November 6th, Henry faced the truth at an emergency council meeting at Bishop Winchester's house. The man who'd spent months bragging about his perfect marriage learned that his wife had been sexually active with multiple partners before their wedding and possibly during it. Henry's reaction was unprecedented. First came pure rage. He screamed for a sword to kill Catherine himself, swearing she'd have such delight in her incontinency as she should have torture in her death. Then came something nobody expected. Tears. The King of England wept in front of his embarrassed counselors, crying about his ill luck in meeting with such ill-conditioned wives. Henry fled Hampton Court that same night, leaving Catherine locked in her rooms while investigators dug deeper. What they found next would turn adultery into high treason. When romance becomes treason. The investigation quickly uncovered Catherine's affair with Thomas Culpeper. Under interrogation, likely involving torture, Culpeper made a confession that sealed everyone's fate. He admitted he intended and meant to do ill with the Queen, and that in likewise the Queen so minded to do with him. Under Henry's 1534 Treason Act, you didn't need to prove actual adultery. The law covered anyone who do maliciously wish, will, or desire by words or writing, or by craft, to imagine harm to the king. Culpeper's confession of treasonous intent was enough for a death sentence. Same with Catherine appointing Derham to her household, which suggested she planned to resume their relationship. The trials were just for show. On December 1st, Culpeper and Derham were condemned at Guildhall for high treason. Both received the full punishment for traitors, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Only Culpeper's status as a royal favorite earned him the mercy of simple beheading. December 10th, 1541. Tyburn, the place where London came to watch people die. Thomas Culpeper went first. He knelt by the gallows as tradition demanded, asked the crowd to pray for him, and died with a single stroke of the axe. Quick, clean, almost merciful. Then came Francis Derham's turn. Here's where Tudor justice showed its true face. Derham was hanged until he was nearly dead, then cut down while still conscious. The executioner sliced open his stomach and pulled out his intestines while he watched them burn. His heart was ripped from his chest. Only after this prolonged agony was he finally beheaded and his body carved into quarters. The crowd watched the gruesome spectacle designed to terrorize anyone who might think about committing treason against the king. Both men's heads ended up on spikes above London Bridge, joining the collection of rotting skulls that decorated the city's main entrance. People were so used to seeing these displays that they barely noticed anymore. England had become a place where state-sponsored torture was just part of daily life. The executions sent shockwaves through the Howard family. The Duke of Norfolk, realizing his own neck was on the line, desperately tried to distance himself from his relatives. He laughed during the trials like he was enjoying himself, then bragged about revealing his stepmother's crimes. The man who'd orchestrated Catherine's rise now called her his ungrateful niece and said she deserved to burn. The final act. Catherine spent her last months bouncing between prisons, Hampton Court, then Sion Abbey, and finally the Tower of London. Her behavior showed just how complex she really was. She swung between screaming hysteria and cold defiance, childish denial, and mature acceptance of what was coming. When Archbishop Cranmer first questioned her, Catherine had such violent breakdowns that he worried she might hurt herself. She denied everything, then gradually admitted to her relationships with Manox and Derham while insisting she'd never cheated as queen. Most importantly, she refused to admit any marriage contract with Derham, which might have saved her life by making her marriage to Henry invalid. Her confession to the king was both pathetic and revealing. She called herself Your Grace's most sorrowful subject and most vile wretch in the world, and begged for mercy based on her youth, ignorance, and frailness. She admitted her relations with Manox and Derham, but even facing death, Catherine's Howard pride wouldn't break. She refused to admit being married to anyone but the king, no matter what it cost her. This stubborn refusal eliminated the one defense that might have saved her life. Parliament passed a Bill of Attainder against Catherine in February 1542. The proceedings were unprecedented. Henry refused to attend the vote, giving his approval through written documents to spare himself hearing the charges again. The bill created a new law making it treason for any woman with a sexual past to marry the king without confessing first. On February 10th, Catherine took her final boat ride to the Tower, passing under London Bridge, where her former lovers' heads still rotted on their spikes. The night before her execution, Catherine asked for the block to be brought to her cell so she could practice positioning her head. February 13th, 1542. Tower Green at 9 in the morning. Catherine Howard walked to her execution as composed as her weakened state allowed. She was so frail she needed help getting up the scaffold and could barely speak the traditional words. Weeks of imprisonment, interrogation, and terror had reduced the vivacious teenager to a shadow of herself. Her final speech followed the required script. She admitted her heinous sins against both God and King Henry, acknowledged that she had been justly condemned by the laws of the realm and Parliament to die, and asked the crowd to take example from her fate and gladly obey the king. She was about 21 years old and had been queen for 18 months. Her body went to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula in the Tower, where it remains beside her cousin Anne Boleyn and the other victims of Henry's matrimonial adventures. Aftermath. The Howard family's destruction was swift, but not total. The Duke of Norfolk survived through desperate groveling, while other relatives suffered imprisonment and lost their estates. Most were eventually pardoned, but the message was crystal clear. Even the most powerful noble families could be crushed if they threatened royal authority. Henry emerged from the scandal as a different man entirely. His sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, was chosen specifically for her mature character and proven virtue. Henry had learned that youth and beauty came with dangers he couldn't handle anymore. His days of romantic passion were finished, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who'd been burned once too often. So what do you think about the Howard family's power game? Was Catherine just a victim, or did she make her own choices? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Smash that like button if this story shocked you, and subscribe for more.